In August 1914, Europe was swept into a whirlwind of war unlike anything it had ever seen. Just 6 weeks after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, the fragile peace holding the continent together shattered as a web of military alliances, escalating ultimatums, and thunderous declarations of war dragged the great powers into a global conflict. France, still bearing the unhealed wound of Alsace-Lorraine for 44 long years, entered the war with fiery determination, convinced that this was the moment to reclaim the territory lost in 1870. Yet behind the patriotic cries of revanche lay a fatal strategic miscalculation. Plan 17. Since 1912, France's chief of the General Staff, General Joseph Joffre, had labored tirelessly to create a grand strategy for war against Germany. Plan 17 was not a detailed operational blueprint, but an offensive doctrine built upon a belief, indeed an illusion, that sheer attacking spirit and national fervor could drive the Germans from French soil. The doctrine of élan vital became the army's rallying cry. French leaders believed that an army full of zeal would triumph regardless of German firepower or modern tactics. Thus, the French army of 1914 trained to attack, not defend. They marched into battle wearing bright red trousers, dark blue coats, and kepis, carrying the spirit of the 19th century straight into the industrial warfare of the 20th. While Germany prepared for modern war with machine guns, rapid-fire artillery, rigid discipline, and lightning mobility by rail, France still trusted that morale was its greatest weapon. When Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st, France had no choice but to mobilize. Paris erupted with cheers as men shouldered their packs. Families said tearful goodbyes filled with hope and dread. Propaganda posters plastered the streets, urging young men to enlist and restore France's honor. But all of this enthusiasm would soon collide with the steel storm of the Schlieffen Plan, Germany's grand strategy to sweep through Belgium and strike France's flank before Russia could fully mobilize. Joffre believed Germany's main attack would come directly through Lorraine, and therefore massed huge forces in the east. The I, Tatu, and Feixti Corps were ordered toward Lorraine, poised to strike into Alsace-Lorraine, the sacred territory France had long yearned to reclaim. This marked the opening phase of the Battle of the Frontiers, where hundreds of thousands of French and German soldiers would clash in some of the bloodiest fighting of the war's opening week. On August 7th, the first French shots of the war rang out as 7th Corps crossed the border into Alsace and captured Mulhouse within hours. News of victory swept through Paris. Crowds celebrated as though the war would be won in mere weeks. But the triumph was short-lived. Germany counterattacked immediately, and within 2 days, France was forced to withdraw, its first bitter taste of defeat. Meanwhile, in the north, the German advance through Belgium cut like a blade through silk. Liège fell, Belgian forces were driven back, and General von Kluck's First Army surged south at a pace that stunned the French high command. Joffre began to realize he had miscalculated gravely. He had concentrated too many troops in Lorraine while France's right flank, the most vulnerable section, lay exposed to the main German thrust. But by the time the truth reached frontline commanders, it was too late to reverse course. On August 14th, Joffre launched his grand offensive under Plan 17. 4 French armies surged forward. The 1st and 2nd attacked Lorraine. The 3rd and 4th pushed into the Ardennes, and the 5th Army advanced toward Charleroi to support the Belgians along the Sambre. It was one of the largest offensives of the war's opening phase, over 1 million French soldiers advancing at once. But instead of striking Germany's weak points, they were marching straight into the jaws of its steel trap. In Lorraine, German artillery rained down on the French like a summer thunderstorm. The French red trousers made perfect targets across open fields. German Maxim machine guns shredded entire attacking formations. Many French soldiers fell before they even saw the enemy. The proud doctrine of élan collapsed instantly beneath the brutal reality of modern warfare. Machine guns and artillery, not courage, ruled the battlefield. In the Ardennes, the situation was even more catastrophic. The dense forests and steep ridges made visibility and communication nearly impossible. Joffre believed the Germans here were weak and on the defensive. In reality, Germany had deployed both its 4th and 5th armies to the region. As French forces advanced into fog-covered valleys, German artillery erupted from behind thick tree lines, followed by fierce infantry counterattacks. French troops, unprepared for forest warfare and deprived of accurate intelligence, were thrown into a slaughterhouse of steel. Within 48 hours, both the Lorraine and Ardennes offensives had collapsed. To the north, disaster deepened. France's Fifth Army under General Lanrezac clashed with Germany's Second Army at Charleroi. The German assault on the Sambre hit the French exactly where they were weakest. Bridges were destroyed under bombardment, French infantry were forced back yard by yard, and German forces crossed the river with staggering speed. When the British Expeditionary Force at Mons also came under simultaneous attack, the entire French right wing trembled under the strain. The Battle of the Frontiers, from Alsace to Belgium, was falling apart piece by piece. France had expected to march into Germany and reclaim its honor. Instead, it was dragged headfirst into an unprecedented storm of industrial warfare. Plan 17 had failed within its first week. Not only had France failed to retake Alsace-Lorraine, it now faced the terrifying prospect of total collapse unless it could retreat in time and reorganize. On the morning of August 14, 1914, the Lorraine frontier lay beneath a thin veil of mist as France's First and Second Armies simultaneously launched their offensive under Joffre's orders. Columns of soldiers in red trousers and blue coats marched forward to the sound of blaring bugles, carrying with them the unshakable conviction that they would reclaim Alsace-Lorraine, lost since 1870. Hundreds of thousands advanced with fiery enthusiasm, as if marching in a grand parade rather than into the furnace of industrial warfare. But what awaited them was not the weakly held frontier Joffre had imagined. Germany had prepared an intricately constructed defensive network in Lorraine, machine guns cleverly concealed on wooded slopes, trenches dug deep into the hillsides, and artillery emplacements calibrated days in advance. Where France's attacking spirit looked nostalgically toward the past, Germany's modern warfare confronted them with the cold brutality of new technology. In the early hours, French troops moved across open fields, thin woods, and rocky valleys. They found villages abandoned and roads empty of German soldiers. Many officers assumed the enemy was retreating. In reality, the eerie quiet was a warning. The Germans had deliberately drawn them into a killing zone where every gun was already trained on their approach. By late morning, the sky suddenly trembled as German artillery erupted. Shells shrieked through the air and exploded among the advancing French ranks. The bright red trousers and rigid line formations made perfect targets for German gunners who were receiving precise spotting reports from forward observers. Entire companies were wiped out within minutes. Survivors attempted to scatter, only to be cut down by machine gun fire pouring from hidden bunkers along the hillsides. On August 15th, Joffre insisted the offensive continue, believing persistence would break the German line. Generals Dubé and Castelnau, despite witnessing horrific casualties, were compelled to press on. Exhausted but disciplined, French soldiers marched past the bodies of their fallen comrades. They crossed patches of scorched earth where artillery had blackened the soil and passed through forests shredded by the invisible blades of modern firepower. On August 16th, the fighting at Morhange descended into catastrophe. As French troops advanced along a broad valley, German forces, still unseen inside their fortifications, opened fire all at once. Machine guns unleashed long, murderous bursts, while artillery thundered relentlessly. French formations were torn apart before they ever laid eyes on the enemy. Officers leading from horseback or carrying regimental colors became immediate targets and fell in large numbers. With their leaders gone, infantry units collapsed into chaos. The losses were so severe that Castelnau was forced to halt the attack. But the Germans did not allow him time to regroup. The German Sixth Army counterattacked with astonishing speed. Waves of German infantry surged forward behind a curtain of accurate artillery fire, driving the French back yard by yard. Many French battalions fought to the last possible moment, but rifles and courage could not overcome machine guns and modern artillery. At Sarrebourg, the tragedy unfolded much the same. French troops entered dense forest where visibility was limited to a few dozen meters. They had no idea the Germans had already dug a network of communication trenches and fortified machine gun nests with timber and packed earth. As soon as the French stepped onto narrow woodland paths, German guns opened fire at point-blank range. Hundreds fell within seconds. Survivors dropped to the ground, clawing for cover behind roots and stones. But German fire continued to rake the forest floor without pause. By nightfall on the 16th, the French were forced to retreat from Sarrebourg in disarray. Columns straggled westward, carrying the wounded on improvised stretchers and dragging damaged artillery behind them. Along dark forest roads came the cries of pain and despair, mingling with the groans of the injured. Many units lost all contact with command. Some were cut off entirely and had to fight their way out in desperate breakout attempts. On August 17th, Joffre finally recognized that the Lorraine offensive had failed. He ordered a full withdrawal to the Nancy-Luneville defensive line. Though shattered and exhausted, French troops dug in with grim determination. Combat engineers worked through the night, felling trees, building fieldworks, and carving trenches into the earth to brace for the next German onslaught. News of the defeat reached Paris and stunned the nation. The wave of confidence and patriotic fervor that had filled the streets during mobilization dissolved in disbelief. No one had expected that tens of thousands would fall in just 3 days. But the truth was even harsher. The defeat in Lorraine was only the beginning. To the north, in the Ardennes, and along the Sambre River, French forces were plunging into an even more catastrophic maelstrom, where German armies repeatedly smashed their poorly prepared offensives. While the Lorraine front was burning under the storm of German artillery, another disaster was quietly taking shape to the north, deep within the wooded mountains of the Ardennes, where the French believed no large army could possibly maneuver. For decades, this region had been viewed as a natural shield. Steep hills, dense forests, narrow ravines, and year-round mist that cloaked nearly every movement. But that very confidence in this natural wall would drive the French straight into a massive trap they never saw coming. At the opening of the campaign, France's 3rd and 4th armies were ordered to advance into the Ardennes, under the aggressive doctrine of Plan 17, convinced that only weak German forces were present. The reality was entirely different. Germany had concealed 2 powerful field armies within the forests, supported by rapid communications, mobile artillery, and units specially trained for operations in difficult terrain. As the French advanced, the dense mist reduced visibility to only a few dozen meters. They had no idea that German troops were hidden on the ridgelines, along ravine edges, and inside the thick woods. Neither side could properly scout with aircraft due to the weather. But only one side had prepared for what was coming, and it was not the French. On August 20th, as the first French columns pushed deeper into the Ardennes, the tangled terrain stretched their formations thin. Units were separated. Artillery became bogged down on wet forest roads, and several batteries were trapped in the mud. Infantry advanced in eerie silence, hearing only rustling leaves and the whisper of wind through the treetops. Behind that deceptive calm, however, lay Germany's meticulously prepared killing grounds. Their gun positions were camouflaged so well that even seasoned French scouts failed to detect them. As the French pushed forward, the Germans had already set every advantage in place. At dawn on August 21st, with the fog still thick, German artillery suddenly opened fire from the heights. Shells burst along the narrow forest trails, obliterating regiments packed tight on the march. Officers tried to rally their men, but orders were drowned in a relentless barrage. And as soon as the shelling eased, machine guns crackled from hidden nests deep within the forest canopy. French infantry never saw their attackers. They saw only their comrades falling in waves, with no visible target to shoot back at. In many places, French units attempted to deploy for battle but were crippled by the terrain. Battalions and companies became scattered and unable to coordinate. Some were split apart on steep, narrow paths. Meanwhile, German troops darted between elevated positions, always maintaining superior visibility and superior firepower. They fired and vanished, then fired again, creating a terrifying illusion that the French were surrounded by an invisible enemy. By midday, chaotic engagements erupted throughout the forest. Near Neufchâteau, French forces attempted to storm the German-held heights, only to be torn apart by machine gun fire and long-range artillery. Traditional line formation assaults turned into outright massacres. Hundreds of soldiers fell on slick, rain-soaked slopes. Entire regiments lost more than half their strength in less than an hour. Throughout the afternoon, the situation worsened. General Ruffy's Third Army reported that it could not advance due to constant German resistance. General Langle de Cary's Fourth Army slipped into turmoil as units lost all contact with command. In the Ardennes, the screams of the wounded blended with the crack of rifles, the rattle of machine guns, and the thunder of distant artillery, an echoing roar like a great beast tearing the French line apart. The disaster grew so severe that even German officers noted the bravery of the French troops. Despite being ambushed from every direction, they fought fiercely, clinging to every tree trunk and every scrap of earth. But courage alone could not overcome a battlefield the Germans had turned into a giant trap. Every attempt to regain initiative failed. The chaos of the Ardennes rendered France's numerical advantage almost meaningless. By nightfall on August 21st, both the Third and Fourth Armies had been driven back with devastating losses. Many battalions were wiped out entirely or broken into small, scattered groups forced to navigate the forest in darkness, carrying wounded on makeshift stretchers. Some units were reduced to only a few dozen men. Many officers had no idea where their commands were, their maps rendered useless in the dense woodland. On August 22nd, as the French tried to regroup on secondary lines, German troops once again swept down from the heights. A chain of brutal battles erupted around Libremont, Bertrix, and Meissen. It became the bloodiest day in the entire history of the French army. Over 27,000 soldiers fell in just 24 hours. Not even Verdun or the Somme would match such losses in a single day. By the evening of the 22nd, the Ardennes front had completely collapsed. The Third and Fourth Armies were forced to retreat southwest, abandoning a battlefield littered with bodies, abandoned rifles, and shattered artillery. Survivors bore the horror on their faces. They had not only been defeated, they had seen the total collapse of their faith in the blind offensive doctrine they had been taught for years. The catastrophe in the Ardennes marked a turning point in the Battle of the Frontiers. It not only shattered a major portion of the French army, but also opened a vast gap on the right flank, allowing German forces to drive southward like a storm unleashed. After the crushing defeats in Lorraine and the Ardennes, France's last hope of holding the frontier line rested on its right wing. General Lannesac's Fifth Army, fighting alongside the Belgians in an effort to defend the Sambre River. It was a critical defensive line. If Germany broke through the Sambre, the entire French right flank would collapse, and the German war machine would pour southward like an unstoppable flood of steel. But precisely in the place where French hopes were highest, one of the greatest disasters of the Battle of the Frontiers unfolded, plunging France into its most perilous situation since the war began. On August 21st, 1914, German forces began pressing toward the Charleroi region, an industrial center of Belgium and the focal point of the French defensive plan. Lannesac, known for his caution and sharp analytical mind, warned repeatedly that the Germans were far stronger than headquarters believed. He observed dense German columns sweeping across Belgium with alarming speed, far faster than the French High Command had imagined. But Joffre, still convinced of Plan 17 and the supremacy of offensive spirit, refused to accept the possibility of a major German assault on the right. Thus, Lannesac was forced to commit his army to a battle he knew would be deeply disadvantageous. On August 22nd, the opening clash erupted along the Sambre. The French quickly realized they were facing not one but two German armies, superior in manpower, artillery, and mobility. German heavy guns were already positioned on the heights overlooking the river crossings. As soon as French troops deployed, German artillery tore into their ranks. Shells exploded among marching companies, killing hundreds within minutes. To the north, the exhausted Belgian troops, battered after the fighting at Liège, struggled to hold their riverside positions but were overwhelmed by relentless German shelling and infantry attacks. German forces crossed the river at multiple points, using pontoon bridges under dense clouds of smoke. Advancing in tight formations, supported by machine guns and field artillery, they punched deep into the Franco-Belgian line. Meanwhile, around Charleroi, the French front descended into chaos. The bridges spanning the Sambre were Germany's primary objectives. At Marcinelle, German artillery demolished the bridge just minutes after a French regiment had retreated across it, plunging many soldiers into the muddy waters below. At Châtelet, French defenders tried to hold the bridge at all costs, but were swept away by German machine gun fire from the opposite bank. Engineering teams attempted to demolish the bridges to block German passage, but the constant shelling cut down many of them before they could even set the charges. On August 23rd, the battle reached its crescendo. Germany committed fresh troops to shatter the French line. General von Bülow's Second Army pushed down from the north, while von Hausen's Third Army struck the French right flank from the southeast. Lanrezac was trapped between two converging jaws, with nowhere near enough men to hold his sprawling front. French divisions fought while retreating step by step, trying desperately to maintain cohesion and avoid encirclement. One of the fiercest struggles occurred at Gauzet, where French troops launched repeated counterattacks to retake a bridge seized by the Germans. Wave after wave of infantry surged forward under torrents of German fire. With extraordinary courage, they advanced through rubble and broken concrete, but German machine guns in fortified positions shredded every attempt. In the end, the French abandoned their effort when casualties became unsustainable. Nearby at Tamins, one of the earliest German atrocities of the war unfolded. Belgian civilians were rounded up and executed on suspicion of aiding resistance fighters. News of the massacre spread rapidly along the front, deepening panic among the French and Belgians and highlighting the brutality Germany was unleashing along the frontier. Lanrezac knew that if he continued to hold his ground, the entire Fifth Army would be surrounded and annihilated. For 2 days, he sent increasingly urgent telegrams to General Headquarters requesting permission to retreat. Joffre initially refused, but after receiving alarming reports from Mons, where the British Expeditionary Force was also under heavy attack, he was forced to accept reality. The French right wing was collapsing. Late on August 23rd, Lanrezac ordered a withdrawal from Charleroi. French artillery fired its final covering barrages, then limbered up and pulled back under the cover of darkness. Along narrow forest roads, long columns of infantry stretched for miles, retreating while fighting rearguard actions to slow the German advance. At several points, small French companies were left behind as sacrificial rearguards, fighting to the last man to buy precious time for their comrades. Their silent heroism played a decisive role in preventing the Fifth Army from being destroyed. At dawn on August 24th, the French had withdrawn from the Sambre, but behind them lay thousands of bodies and towns reduced to ruins by German fire. The Sambre was lost, Charleroi was lost, and France's right wing had been broken completely. The Battle of the Frontiers had shifted decisively from offensive to chaotic retreat. Germany had pierced the French line with overwhelming speed and force, opening a direct path southward. As Charleroi collapsed, the Ardennes fell, and Lorraine burned. The entire eastern and northeastern fronts of France shattered like glass struck by a hammer of steel. In just a few days, all hopes tied to Plan 17 evaporated. What remained in French hands was no longer the initiative, but the very survival of hundreds of thousands of soldiers facing the risk of encirclement and total destruction. Confronted with this perilous turning point, General Joffre was forced to make a historic decision: a full retreat, reorganizing the army before France itself collapsed. This was not a simple withdrawal. It was a desperate, epic journey stretching more than 200 kilometers, during which French and British forces were locked in a race against the terrifying speed of the German advance. Every day they faced dozens of attacks, struggling to maintain cohesion while avoiding being outflanked and cut off by von Kluck's sweeping right wing. On August 24th, as French forces pulled back from Charleroi and the British retreated from Mons, the true nature of Germany's lightning offensive came into focus. Von Kluck's First Army swept down from the north like the blade of an axe, seeking to cut across the Allied line of retreat. Meanwhile, Germany's Second and Third Armies pressed hard from behind, driving the Allies southward step by step. With no defensive lines left to rely on, the French could only trust their legs to save them. The final days of August became a waking nightmare. Endless streams of retreating troops clogged the dusty roads of northern France. Some infantry units marched more than 40 kilometers a day under blistering heat, with the distant rumble of German guns behind them and reconnaissance aircraft growling overhead. They marched in despair, burdened by heavy packs, rifles, dwindling rations, and at times even the bodies of wounded comrades they refused to abandon. Along the roads, chaotic scenes mingled with tragic determination. Convoys of wounded crawling forward, farmers, women, and children fleeing in panic, clutching whatever possessions they could carry. And clouds of dust so thick that soldiers wrapped wet cloths around their faces just to breathe. Yet despite crushing exhaustion, French units maintained order, knowing that even a moment of panic could doom an entire army. Meanwhile, the British Expeditionary Force, retreating alongside the French right, was also staggering southward. After Mons and Le Cateau, their losses were severe. Many units had only half their original strength. But British discipline and impeccable organization allowed them to maintain their formations under all circumstances. They fought sharp, disciplined rearguard actions, firing with deadly accuracy to slow the German advance before slipping away to avoid encirclement. During these days, German mobility proved overwhelming. Pre-prepared railways and road networks allowed them to redeploy forces southward faster than the French could fall back. Cavalry patrols often appeared just a few kilometers from French columns, threatening to sever their escape routes. Yet through a series of costly rearguard battles, fought almost as sacrifices, the French and British repeatedly escaped the tightening German net. At Guise, Joffre compelled Lanrezac to counterattack in order to halt the German advance. On August 29th, the French launched a major assault that slowed von Bülow's forces and forced the Germans to realign. Though costly, this limited victory bought precious time for the retreating armies. After Guise, the French continued sliding southward like water forced through a broken dam. On August 30th, the situation worsened again as the main German thrust swung deeper toward the southeast. Towns such as Saint-Quentin, La Fère, and Noyon fell one after another. Fierce fighting erupted around key bridges, where French units held just long enough for those behind them to cross. Some defensive positions survived only a few hours before being crushed by German artillery. But those few hours saved tens of thousands of soldiers from encirclement. By early September, the storm of steel still pressed relentlessly behind the French. Roads around Compiègne and Senlis were jammed with soldiers, civilians, carts, and wagons. Morale began to waver. The troops had fought, retreated, and marched for nearly 2 weeks with barely any rest. In many units, only a third of the original men remained. Yet in this deep despair, a new resolve began to take shape. The French understood they were retreating not in defeat, but to prepare for a final stand, a battle that might save France from destruction. During these same days, Paris trembled. Word spread that German forces were nearing the Marne, only a few dozen kilometers from the capital. The French government evacuated to Bordeaux, the city prepared for desperate defense. But Joffre, despite his earlier errors, still held an ace. He had managed to build a new defensive line along the Marne and the outskirts of Paris. To complete it, he needed time, and that time was purchased with the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers along the retreat. On September 4th, as the final exhausted units of the French and British armies crossed the Marne, Joffre realized his moment had come. The German armies, having advanced too fast and too far, had overstretched themselves and become separated from their reserves. It was the greatest strategic error Germany had made since the war began. And when von Kluck chose to march around Paris rather than directly toward it, he opened a gap, one that Joffre could exploit. The Great Retreat, from the Sambre, Mons, and Charleroi all the way to the Marne, finally came to an end. But it left an indelible mark on the history of modern warfare. It was a journey of exhaustion, loss, endurance, and a faint but growing hope amid the darkness. And from that retreat, the French would rise again at the Battle of the Marne, where the fate of France and of Europe itself would be decided. The 1914 frontier battles closed like a dark epic overture to the storm of World War I. In those short but blood-soaked days, the French army tasted the brutal reality of industrial warfare, where courage alone could not stand against modern artillery and machine guns. Lorraine collapsed, the Ardennes were shattered, the Sambre fell, and the Great Retreat to the Marne pushed France to the very edge of annihilation. Yet from those ashes, a fierce will to survive erupted stronger than ever, leading to the Battle of the Marne, where France turned the tide and halted the German war machine in its tracks. What are your thoughts on this terrifying chain of battles that opened World War I? Share your views below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow more historic clashes, brought to life with all the fire, scale, and grim realism of their age.